Steven Spielberg film, Catch Me If You Can, is based on a true story, the life story of my guest today. 40 years ago, when he was just a teenager, he conned people into thinking he was an airline pilot. And that was just the start of what turned into one of the most outrageous crime sprees of the 20th century. Frank Abagnale, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
What was it like seeing your life story on film?
It was pretty surreal. I watched the film in Steven Spielberg's office by myself in a very dark theater with a huge screen. And at first I really didn't think it would be a big deal. I thought I was just going to watch a film and I'd say, yeah, that was pretty good, that was not too good. But as I started to watch the film, having never seen the script or really knew what the context of the film was, I didn't realize that it went back in my childhood so much to my parents and growing up. And so it really was very much like being there. It was like being in my home. And Christopher Walken and Natalie Bay did such an incredible job of playing my parents that I truly felt that I was there with them. And as the film went on, that I was basically in a room watching my youth be replayed in front of me on a big screen. So it was quite an experience. And the movie, in the end, turned out to me to be a much more serious film than I thought it would be. And it also was a little more accurate than I thought it would be.
And yet I know you had some concerns that it was, and many people would say that it does, glamorize your crimes.
Right. I was very concerned that when years ago I heard the rights had been bought by so many different studios, that someone would make a movie much like an American Pie or these young movies you see today where they have really no meaning to them whatsoever and it just kind of glorifies the character in the film. And I didn't want that to happen, having 3 children of my own. And I was very concerned about that. Of course, once I read that Steven Spielberg decided that he would personally direct it, I knew that it wouldn't be that kind of movie, that he wouldn't make a movie like that unless he felt he was making some statement in his film, he wouldn't make the film. So I felt a little bit better at it. But then I saw the trailer, and only having seen the trailer, I thought, oh, this is just kind of a comedy, and it's kind of a mouse and cat chase, and that's all really it is. And it turned out to be obviously a lot more than that, I felt.
Okay, we should get to the bottom of what your story is, because you were, what we say, a teenager. How old were you when you ran away from
16.
And yet, age 16, you managed to convince people that you were a pilot. Was the first deception.
Yes. And, I know that a lot of people look back at what I did and they think how amazing it is. But, I look back on it, and I really don't see it as that amazing. I was a kid who ran away from home and ended up in New York City writing bad checks. And I happened to come up the street and see an airline crew. And I thought to myself, if I could get a uniform, then I could be this pilot going around cashing these checks. That's all I thought about, and that it would give me credibility and people wouldn't question it. It would be easy to cash checks, that's all. But I was very much the opportunist, so that when I got out to the airport and people started saying, well, do you want to ride on the plane? And I found that I could ride for free and that I could stay in hotels and build the airline. I just took everything step at a time. If I had sat down to premeditate this plan to become a doctor, become a lawyer, become a pilot, it would have never happened. It was just that I was always in the right place at the right time, always willing to take advantage of an opportunity. And I think that's where my success lied. And that and the fact that I was an adolescent and had no fear of being caught. I wasn't thinking about contemplating what my consequences were. And I never had in my vocabulary the 2 words, what if? I never walked in a bank or approached anything and said to myself, what if they say this? What if this happens?
But what if they expect you to fly the plane?
Right, I said I would deal with that when it happened if they asked me to do that. But I also,
of course, it never happened.
Never happened because I was smart enough to avoid certain things. For example, I never flew on Pan Am because I was afraid someone might say to me, I'm based in New York, I've been there 20 years, how come I never met you before? Or someone might say, how come your ID is not like my ID? Or that case, why don't you take my seat? I'm going back to have a cup of coffee. So instead I rode on every other airline, so I didn't run into those things and avoided anybody asking me to do things and stuff like that.
Slightly different scenario though when you're a doctor, because people do expect you to do things when you're a doctor.
And the doctor thing was, to me, I moved into an apartment complex. I said I was a doctor. I had no intention of being a doctor. It was just something to say this is what I was, and I wasn't practicing. Then I met this other doctor, and I found myself going to the library reading to keep up conversation with this real doctor that lived in the apartment building. then he invited me up to this hospital. So I went, and I met all these people, and they believed I was a doctor. And then when the hospital asked me to cover the shift temporarily, it was just me saying to myself, can I take it to that level and do it?
You know, you could have somebody's life in your hands.
Well, I knew I wasn't going to go down and operate on anyone, and I knew when I could always walk away, which I ultimately did. But I was willing to say to myself, could I actually go to this hospital and do this? And that was the challenge. I wanted to see, could I do it? And could I get in the hospital and actually hold the job and do it? And once I had achieved that, that was really all I needed to do. I had no desire to be a doctor. About 10 days, maybe altogether, that I worked in the hospital. But it was strictly, can I get away with this? And when I was called down to the emergency room, and there was a young child there that had cut his leg, and the two other doctors were talking about the treatment, that's when I realized that I was in a situation that could turn very serious and that this was the wrong place to be. So I left.
But to watch you talking about it now, you're smiling. I mean, was it enjoyable? Was it a game?
It couldn't help but become a game because I was just a kid playing this game. You know, I was an adolescent. I wasn't an adult analyzing my actions. And so, you know, when I was doing it, it was obviously wrong. But as a kid, it was just, to me, it was survival. It was moving to the net, you know, to stay one step ahead of the law that was chasing me, that was going to put me behind bars. That's really all it was. And how far was I willing to go? You know, I wasn't willing to stick a gun in someone's face. I wasn't willing to physically hurt somebody. I wasn't willing to steal some individual's money from them or their life savings. I had certain limitations that I wasn't willing to go over that line. But there
you were stealing an awful lot, $2.5 million, I believe it was, in the end.
Right, and that was more of a game. You know, most of the $2 million was recovered. I never spent it, obviously. I had no ability to spend it. I was just a kid. I couldn't spend $2 million. And then, of course, years later, my company repaid a great deal of the balance of the money back by our own choice. I was not obligated to do so. So, you know, I mean, at the time, it was just all justified in your mind by saying, you know, I'm not robbing some individual, I'm robbing a big bank. You know, and I'm only doing this, it's not really hurting anybody. I'm riding around for free. The plane's going to fly anyway. I'm just riding on the plane. I mean, it was, if you wanted to get down to it, and I never did, back in the 60s, I could have been the hippie person saying that I'm ripping off the establishment's ripping off people, and I'm getting the establishment back. I never thought that way. I never looked at it that way. But, I mean, I could have justified it in that sense, but I didn't.
But that wasn't what it was.
No. To me, it was strictly survival. I'm doing this to stay ahead of the game.
The way the film portrays what you were doing, it's very much, I mean, the time seems so naive when you think about the checks that people have now. Could you do it now?
Absolutely. I think the only thing that would be difficult to do today is to get on an airplane posing as a pilot, and that's only because of 9/11. Prior to 9/11, it would have been very easy to do.
So what about the checks? When you go into a bank and you're chatting up a girl just to get, to distract her attention?
Well, no, I don't think that's necessary anymore. See, back 35 years ago, if you were a check passer or a forger, 90% of passing a check was presentation. It was all of those things that had to be considered. The check looked horrible. We knew it looked horrible. So you had to distract the person from the check, and you had to get the person to believe that you were the proper person cashing the check. Today, if I wanted to make a British Airways check, in 30 minutes in a hotel room with a laptop and a printer and a scanner, I could make the most gorgeous four-color British Airways check you've ever seen, with planes flying in the background and all of their colors of their tails on the back of the check. I mean, and present it at a bank today, and the check itself would sell itself because I would have the real bank account number.
So you could look as dodgy as you like. The cost.
Right. No matter what I look like, because I would be able to say to the bank teller, if you need to call British Airways, give them a call. If you need to call this bank to verify the check, give them a call. Because I would be using the real signature that I got out of the annual report that British Airways publishes. I would have gotten the bank account because I would have called British Airways and asked them what's their wiring instructions, and they would have told me where they banked and what street and what city and their account number.
So you could do it now, no problem?
Yeah, without any question.
But then, I mean...
Then it was a little more difficult and took a little more creativity to get it done.
Right. You... Eventually, of course, as we say, you were caught by the FBI after you got away with it.
5 years, yeah.
Well, you were ready to be caught?
Yeah, I think any criminal sooner or later is ready to get caught because you get tired of running. It's obviously a very lonely life. There was nobody to talk to, nobody to trust, nobody to even share what you were doing with to say, look, this is what I'm getting away with. And after a while, I was getting older. I mean, it's one thing to do it at 16, at 20, you become more mature and you start to look at things in a totally different way. For example, for a long period of time when I walked in a bank and picked one of those tellers, I was only thinking of the bank. Well, this bank has billions of dollars, so if I take $500, what do they care? But when I got to be 19 or 20 and I picked the teller and she or he cashed the check, I would then say to myself leaving, I hope they don't lose their job because I convinced them to do something they weren't supposed to do. They might get fired. I was a lot more concerned about the individual. So that was just a sign of maturity and a sign of realizing that there was a lot more to my actions than I perceived as a 16-year-old. But that came with growing up and getting a little bit older. And so the older I got, the harder it came, the more difficult it was to do.
Of course, now you've completely changed your attitude to it, and you say you don't want to glamorize it, but the nature of the film, it does, doesn't it? I mean, you've played by Leonardo DiCaprio, for God's sake.
Well, I think they all, people love the story. When the book was written some 25 years ago, I never thought the book would even sell. But it went on to be a bestseller on the New York Times list 3 weeks after it was published and went on to be printed in 39 languages around the world. 25 years later, today, as we speak, it's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's back in print all over the world again. So it is amazing to me that this story has lasted for so long and is still be popular with today's generation as it was with the generation of my own. So for someone 25 years later like Steven Spielberg to say, I loved your book when I read it 20 years ago, and, I loved it when I read it a year ago, and decide to make it into a movie is amazing to me.
But you say you're worried about the messages that someone might take from what you do. And yet, I mean, one clear message seems to be that crime does pay.
Well, I don't know. If you really wanted to look at it, I make 10 times the amount of money today than I made as a criminal. So I've shown that you can take something very negative, you can do something very positive with it, and become much more of a success today as an ex-entrepreneur doing something legally than I did doing something illegally.
And this is because you advise companies now on how to
because I work for thousands of corporations today that I advise and work for some of the biggest banks in the world, and I've developed technology today that's found on currencies, passports, driver's licenses, car titles, visas that are used all over the world that pay me royalties for the use of those technologies. So I've taken something very negative and turned it into something very positive and done something with it. But this brings back to the opportunist again, the entrepreneur. Found in a position to come out of prison, no money. I went back to being the entrepreneur and the opportunist, but this time in a straight way, in a positive way, rather than in a negative way.
Now, you were sentenced to 12 years. You served 5 years because of a deal you cut with the FBI.
Not so much a deal. I actually served the required time I was allowed to serve, but the government said to me as part of my parole, they wanted me to train federal law enforcement agents, and that would just be part of my parole. I would not be compensated. So I said, for how long? They said, for the length of your parole. So I said, I agree. The length of my parole lasted about 3 years. When it was over in 3 years, the government said, you've been a great asset to us. We would like for you to stay on, but of course the government will compensate you. And my answer to the government was, I don't need to be compensated. I will stay on because I would not be where I am today had it not been the opportunities you've given me. And today, for 26 years, I have worked for my government without compensation. The United States government has never paid me 10 cents for the work I do for the government. I spend about 55 days teaching at the FBI Academy, teaching in the field to federal agents, and I have for 26 years. Even my travel expenses I pay. I do not ask the government to reimburse me for my travel.
Is that because you feel guilty for what you did?
I feel guilty for what I did. I felt that it was wrong, and I feel that this is a small way, a very small way, that I get to pay back my debt. Because whether I return the money or not, I felt that I committed it as something that I need to rectify. I also need to show my children that I am doing something to pay my debt back to society. And my children have watched me work with the FBI on all of their, since they've grown up, my oldest being 23. And they know that I do it for free. And they know that I do it because I want to do it and because I want to repay that money. And that's very important to me.
What was the turning point?
Well, now, I know a lot of people ask that question, and to be honest with you, a lot of people are waiting for that dramatic answer. They want me to say that I was a born-again Christian, but that's not the case. They would like me to say that I was sitting in a prison cell and I found God, but that's not the case. They would like me to say that I went to prison and prison rehabilitated me and changed my life, and that's not so either. And I guess I could sit back and appease a lot of people by just using that old adage that, hey, I grew older, I got wiser, wisdom. But to be very honest with you, 26 years ago, I met my wife. Didn't have a dime to my name. I told her that what I had done. And eventually I asked her to marry me. And against the wishes of her parents, she did. And the truth is, she changed my life. She gave me 3 beautiful boys. She gave me a family. And basically, she's made me the man I am. She believed in me. She trusted me. She had faith in me. She gave me all the confidence that I have to do what I do today. And the truth is, I am who I am because of my wife and my children. And for that reason, I would never, ever do anything that would bring them embarrassment or that would jeopardize me being separated from them or anything that would hurt them in any way. So I've never even in my mind ever thought about doing anything ever again, because the only important thing in my life today to me is my wife and my children. I live for them. They are my life. And they are, and I am because of them.
Did you convince her parents?
Yes, and they love me today.
The secret of conning someone there, we talked about that. It's changed because now you can make a perfect check.
And not only that, but we can steal millions of dollars today without ever seeing the person.
The film, you signed the rights for this film a long time ago, and then effectively it's out of your hands.
Yes.
And now you're getting all the comeback from it. Are you enjoying it?
Yes and no. I obviously have enjoyed my experience of dealing with people like Steven Spielberg and Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. They have been wonderful to me. They have been wonderful to my children. They've been wonderful to my family. The company DreamWorks could have not been nicer to me than they have. I mean, they've been a great company and a great experience to work with. But when the book was written...
You didn't have any say in the film, though, did you?
No, none. And I make no money. If the movie makes $1 billion, I won't see 10 cents. I'm talking to you today, and I am here for free because I am obligated to be here, because 25 years ago I said I would go on this junket if a movie was made. So I'm living up to my obligation, but no one's paying me. Yes, but on the downside of it is that when the book first came out, I was on all the television shows in America. Johnny Carson 9 times, Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin, Oprah Winfrey, Phil Donahue, all the shows. And I had to live with people going, oh, there's that guy that was that con man. And I'd walk in a room, people go, oh, I better watch my watch, put it away, I better get my wallet. And I lived with that for years. And then finally all of that died and went away, and people forgot about me, and a new generation came along and never heard of me. And I never had to deal with that ever again. And that was very nice. And now, at 54 years old, having gone through all I've gone through the last 26 years, I'm back having to relive that over again. I'm walking in rooms and people go, Frank, better watch my watch. Frank, yeah. So I'm going to have to live with that. And that's the downside to all of this. But other than that, it's part of my life. It's something I did, and I'm just reliving another chapter of it that goes with it.
You got to play a part in the movie as well.
They insisted that I have a cameo in it. I really didn't want to, but they insisted I do so. I said in my contract that I would. So I said, if you insist I would. But I said, please put me in a part that I'm not going to stand out, that people are going to recognize me. So they cut all my hair off, and they put me in a cap and a big coat and put me in a night scene playing a French policeman who goes up to arrest Leo in one of the final scenes of the movie. And most people don't know I'm in it, so that's worked out the best.
You say the experience of watching it and how amazing it was, particularly because of your parents and the way they were played. But the movie blames their divorce pretty much for your crime spree. They sort of hinge it all on that.
Right, and I don't know that you can really blame them. I never blame my parents. I think what I said to the screenplay writer 5 years ago, Jeff Nasison, is that I ran away because I had to choose between my mother and my father, and I didn't want to make that choice, so I ran away from home. That was a catalyst that got me to run away from home and ended up in the streets in New York. The decision to break the law, the decision to go out and commit crimes was my decision. Now, whether we can say that all children that are family from divorce sometimes try to get in trouble to get their parents back together, whether were those undertones or subconscious reactions, I don't know. I do know that the ultimate decision to break the law, to do something illegal, was my decision. No one forced me to do that, and only I am to blame and take full responsibility for my actions. I would not turn around and blame my parents for my actions.
Do you regret what you did?
Absolutely. It was immoral, it was illegal, it was unethical, and it was wrong, and I regret it.
But to listen to you, you know, it sounded, the way you talk about it, as I say, it sounded like you enjoyed it. It was fun, it was a game, and now look at all the things that have come from it.
I mean, there's good and bad that's come from it, as in most things in life, and we all make mistakes in life, and I'm just someone who made some mistakes in life. There are people who go out and murder people. There are people who go out and use drugs and sell drugs. There's people that go out and commit horrendous crimes. I mean, we all make mistakes in life. I made some mistakes in my life.
Was it a victimless crime?
Victimless in that there were no individuals that I ripped off for money. Nobody's personal money I took. There were companies and banks, but eventually banks and companies raise interest rates and money to recover that. But in reality, the money was recovered. I paid the money back. So there really isn't anyone sitting there saying they're out the money or they lost money from this crime. So I think there were people that feelings were hurt, that were deceived, girls I met, people I dated, things like that. But other than that, that's all there really was to it. I mean, it's something that happened in life. I made a mistake. They sent me to prison. I spent 5 years of my youth, 21 to 26, behind bars in some very horrible prisons. I've devoted 26 years of my life to my government to try and rectify these mistakes, and that's all I can do. Other than committing suicide, all I can do is go on with my life and try to rectify it.
When you're the other side, of course, now, as you're saying, are there any particular scams that you've come across that you think, that's a clever one? I wouldn't have minded thinking up that one.
Oh, yes. There's one, if I may share it with you, just a few weeks ago. 2 young boys, 18 years old in New Jersey, took an ad out in the New York Post, said they were selling the top 10 X-rated videos for $49.95, that these videos normally sell for $100 a piece, one-time offer, $49.95, all 10 videos, original version, uncut, but no cash, no credit cards, check or money order only. So a lot of people went and got a money order, got a check, and mailed it to this P.O. box in New Jersey. The kids took the check and legally deposited it into a bank account they had opened, a small business account. Then they wrote you a letter the next day back on a very nice letterhead that said, "Thank you very much for your order. Unfortunately, due to the huge demand, we are unable to fill it. So please find enclosed a check for $49.95 to cover your full refund." The only problem was it was a real check. It was off a legitimate account that had the money in it to cover it. But the name of the company was printed in the top left-hand corner of the check, and it was done in fire engine red in big block letters, and the name of the company was Child Pornography Videos Incorporated. So nobody cashed the checks, and the kids kept all the $49.95. So that was a great, great scam.
Frank Abagnale, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.